building. As you stack your stories, you're stacking your dollar bills, right? But for the suburban environment, the opposite is true. The more I don't do that, the lower the taxes I pay, right? So you need to understand that's the way our tax model works. It basically builds the physical world that we're looking at. By the way, for those of you that think I've got a problem with Walmart, I actually presented at but Chris must have presented here too, the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers Conference. I don't know if you all you've been to the conference. It makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man. It's the squarest conference ever. These people are massive nerds. But this guy got up and presented at 8:30 in the morning. And he did this amazing presentation on how cheap Walmarts are. I'm sitting in the back of the room having a coronary because I'm like, this is brilliant. Think of that. 3,000 assessors in one room. And you've just proven you built a cheap building. He's getting all of his property tax lowered in one meeting. That's efficient, right? Now, also trained as an architect and having worked in government, I was like, how are you getting away with this? Why does no one care? Well, the assessors are agnostic. If it's a cheap building, it's a cheap building, period. So I went up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he honestly shot back to me, 15, 20 years. We designed the building to depreciate it as fast as possible so we can maximize our tax discount. We'll build another building and depreciate it down again. We don't care about the building, it's throwaway. That's it. So when I talk to folks in different communities, when I talk to the mayor, I ask them, in your corporation, do you have a 10 or 15-year life cycle? Is that what you want with your town? Because that's what your policies allow for. Don't hate the player, hate the game, right? So for a Walmart, that's the life cycle of the cat. We lease more in the, it's a joke. We lease more in the passing of the cat, right? Don't be so serious, folks. I mean, have some fun with this stuff. So this is what they get. So again, back to Walmart. Don't hate the player, hate the game, but you have to understand the game in order to articulate it to people. So when I talk to folks, I basically say the reason why that chart looks the way that it is that cheap architecture pays less taxes. If that's what you want in your community, awesome. I would argue people don't see that. One is we don't talk about it in a way that people can understand that. Our firm, we believe in visualizing it for folks. And again, that comes back from the training of being an architect, drawing pictures, basically. But think of it this way. If I were to show you this data of your brain with your creative thought process in green versus your brainstem activity in blue, why not make an economic MRI of your place? So this is my county, 350 square miles. Gray is non-taxable. You see Mount Mitchell Federal Park up there. Low value is green, high value is purple. This big purple splotch right here, that's the Biltmore estate. That's America's largest house. That one property is worth $100 million, right? That's really cool. One house worth $100 million. When the Cecil family shows up at one of our council meetings, we all genuflect and thank them for their time because they're really powerful people. But it's really not a fair way of looking at it, right? Because that's a 100-acre parcel with 180,000 square foot, or sorry, 8,000 acre parcel with a 180,000 square foot house on it. Anybody have a 180,000 square foot house? It's like the biggest gas tank. So rather than total value, here's value per acre. And don't stop here with a map for the map people. Take it 3D. Let's be real. Let me go back for a second. I see this all the time with map people. They're like, can't you see what's going on? No. I see a little dot right here, right? When you go to 3D and use that third dimension, and it starts to show you how different purple is from red and red is from green and yellow. You can just use the map to do that. Use visualization to help people see the data. Now, what I can show you in this model is that you can not only see where downtown Asheville is, but look to the east over there. Look at Black Mountain. Black Mountain's 13,000 people. The tallest building in downtown Black Mountain is 3 stories. So from an urban design standpoint, I could see downtown popping off the map. If we're all paying county taxes together, we all pay 6 mils in county taxes. So think of a 6 mil fixed blanket thrown on the county. Where's the county getting all of its revenue? Politically, in my town, I've got 2 voters out in the county for every 1 voter in the city. We're all county taxpayers. My state representative called us a cesspool of sin when I was on the Downtown Association. I'm like, really? How about a thank you card for all the money we're shoveling out into the county, right? If we don't call them on it, they will continue to utilize that power. In a suburban environment, is subsidized. This is where the money's coming from. So, you know, when we first started doing this 10 years ago, everybody's like, well, that's cute, Joe. That's Asheville. Our state's different. It's like, no, you're not. Here's Kansas City. Guess where downtown is. They actually have 2 downtowns. They've got Country Club Plaza just south of it. This is Bozeman, Montana. Anybody want to guess where downtown is? Are you seeing a pattern? This is Manchester, New Hampshire, Brevard, North Carolina, city of 8,000 people. Guess where downtown is? This is spatial analysis. I know this joke doesn't work for most of you, but a couple of y'all that remember that. And we did this for Emily. This is Chicago, Cook County. You can see how monstrous downtown is in its production. And this is just looking at it from the T-stops. And it's that mixed use stuff that you can see popping up around the transit corridor. So this is if you've invested all that infrastructure and cost for the transit system, you should recoup it with some development that produces some wealth back to it, right? One of the misnomers that we get, particularly in fast growing areas, is we have plenty of money. We're not worried, suburban environments in particular. Lancaster, California, which is like up and over the mountain from Los Angeles. Lancaster is an exurb of Los Angeles. And here it is. It's 166,000 people. Their Purple Mountain should be bigger than it actually is right there. But let's just look at the other side of the coin. This is the revenue side. Let's look at cost. I don't know if any of y'all follow Strong Towns, but they're actually presenting this stuff with Chuck Marone at the Congress for New Urbanism, and he was talking about roads. One of the things that people don't realize about roads, that's the mainframe at which your city is built. It's also your most expensive stuff, but they have 953 miles of roads. Again, when you communicate information, if I just left it there, would y'all know what 953 miles looks like? Put it on a map. So they have enough roads to go from Los Angeles to Portland. So when we presented to them, we said, look, roads have a useful life. They fall apart every 50 years, you have to replace them. Now they're in a desert, so it's like every 30 years. One of the misnomers of how governments operate is they treat roads like assets. This kind of blew my mind because my computer's an asset. My delivery van at my house or my truck office is an asset. Piece of real estate that I own is an asset. I can sell you all my computer, my van, or my building. Can Lancaster pick up its roads and sell them to Los Angeles? No, it's not an asset, that's a liability. So you have to look at liabilities and assets different. Assets are something that are recyclable, they have monetary value. Liabilities are fixed and they're permanently maintained. So this is their roads and when the roads were built. And we can all see in 1953, they built a lot of lean miles of roads. Guess what? That comes back to haunt them in 1983 for the first rebuild. Then what they did, because they were in the hole, is they built more roads to get revenue. So what you'll see is when you look back at your hometowns and you see the periphery grow, that's all new taxes to cover up the losses they've already covered. Strong Towns calls this a Ponzi scheme, and they're right. If you're not looking at the costs and consequences of this stuff, you're taking in all of these new calories without understanding your diet. So this comes back for a second rebuild, and it brings along with the new stuff. So we showed them, we said, look, we're just going to stop you in 2016. Here's your rebuild schedule of all of your roads. Does that look sustainable to you? This is just what you're carrying. Now, if you look backward in time and look at the 1950s, why did you do that? You can read any economic literature from the 1950s. Nobody's penciling out the long-term costs and consequences of suburbia. And then we doubled down on it in the 1980s because we convinced ourselves, this is who we are, Joe. We're America. We all love our cars. Okay, well, guess what? There's a cost to that. Here it is compounding on itself, getting bigger and bigger. The scary thing about this, we're not putting in inflation. I'm not putting in the fact that road asphalt cost went up 30% in the year of 2021 alone. This is a big problem for y'all when you go out in the marketplace to try to explain to people. So we said, all right, well, here's your money. We're just going to flush it in your roads. Green are the roads you can afford. Red are the roads that you can't. You can only afford 50% of your roads. Figure it out. You have to help people see where the problem is. And I like to see this as almost like showing people they're having a heart attack with the data. It's another joke. When you have roads and pipes, they're a promise that lasts forever. You can't get rid of these things. You all know the De Beers commercial, but whatever. Lots of times people are just like, well, this is just depressing information. People can't handle a lot of depressing information. So what's the way out of it? In Eugene, Oregon, this is the revenue model in Oregon. Oregon has no retail tax. It's all just property tax. So there it is. We took the city and floated it in the lake. What's above the water line is the money coming out of the city. What's below the water line is the sunk costs of roads, pipes, asphalt, concrete, that kind of stuff. This is what people pay in taxes. This is what it costs the community for their lifestyle choice. So I don't care that you choose to move out there. That's cool. But you should at least cover your cost, right? So if you net your revenue against your cost, you have what's in the black and what's in the red. And then here's the top view of the city. You can see what's net productive. If you lift this model up like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, that's the spread of subsidy across the model. So the simple breakdown of this is, here are the different building types. We've got residential, low density, medium density, high density, mixed use, low, medium, and high, and commercial, low, medium, and high. And these are the sticker prices. So here's a question. Why would you not choose single family detached housing if your government's going to pay you $1,400 a house to live there? It's not, it's not their fault. Are people aware of the cost and consequences to that? One of the things that people always say to me is like, well, I want a house. It's like, yeah, that's true. I want a full head of hair. I think that would make me happy. I think you all should pay for that, right? I mean, that's the comedy of all this stuff. So we show them, we're like, okay, it's fine that you want a house. You can't afford 80% of your land use in subsidy. It's just not a good recipe of economic success. So we told them, definitely do more stuff downtown where you're getting those black spikes. But if you look up here at Crescent Village, that's doing all right. That's a little new urbanist project, by the way. So because it's mixing uses and because it has a relatively higher density than what's regular suburban, it's net positive in cash flow. So we said, why don't you find 4 more areas to do development there? This is the planning model of helping people understand where to make better choices from a city planning perspective. But I want to maybe mention something that I typically don't mention in this talk. The reason why we were hired was to help them understand how to grow their growth boundary. I never mentioned growth boundary in this whole part of the presentation, did I? What we showed them was how much they were wasting land inside the boundary they were in. And they changed their mind from what they thought was the problem they were chasing. That was kind of cool. The other thing we did is we got them to realize that these are all choices. Through the system of analysis, we got a hold of all of their data, but this is their roads. They have, if you squeeze all the roads together, it makes a parking lot, 3 square miles in area. That's at the same scale as the city. When we sat down with the engineer, I joked to the engineer and I said, how much does the city pay in stormwater runoff? And he goes, what do you mean? I'm like, we have a parking lot that big, right? If I built a parking lot that big, wouldn't you charge me stormwater runoff? And he's like, well, yeah. He said, so why isn't the city paying for that? And he's like, his brain exploded. I'm like, y'all have enough roads to go from Eugene to San Francisco. That's shedding a lot of water into the system. That's super expensive. Well, the reason why we did this is because we had to send somebody a bill out here for their stormwater. And it wasn't just going to be their rooftop. They were going to take a piece of all of the roads that gets out to their house. Because if it weren't for their choice to live out there, you wouldn't have to have all of those streets to get out there, right? Let people see the consequences of their choices. And if they can afford it, awesome. But the other way the engineer was sort of having a little bit of cognitive dissonance. So we said, all right, let's just kind of step back for a second. Here's your city. Let's turn your city into a square. That's the land area of your city. Here's all of your impervious surfaces. This beige area is berms, buffers, backyards. The water can actually flow through to the ground, right? Here's the economics of it. So you have about the same area of parking to roads. You can see it in the squares over there. Look at the difference in value. The roads cost $600 million. You've only assessed the value of parking at about $250, right? Why is the parking so less? When the cars move around, we know what the cost of that infrastructure is. And when the car stops, why are we giving it a discount? That's baked into the system. That's a subsidy to parking, right? So anyway, putting it aside, their stormwater cost them about $450 million. This is not cheap, folks. This is expensive stuff in cities. So let's do a little urban design problem for a second. Let's say you chose to have more two-story buildings than one-story buildings. So you still have the same amount of building square footage. It just reduces the footprint, right? If I have less footprint, I can get the buildings closer together, right? If they're closer together, that means less streets and roads. So now I've just cut your impervious surface in half of $222 million, right? So your $450 million infrastructure just went in half. Do y'all follow me? So did your great grandparents ever make the choice in the cost of suburbanizing? Just with stormwater, if they chose to have more two-story buildings, they could have saved $200 million. What's the best way for the community to spend $220 million? Did they ever have that choice? Would they have chosen to stretch out, or would they have chosen to send every child to like Stanford Business School or something like that? Like these are choices that we just don't see that we're actually making over time, and they have costs and consequences. Does that make sense? What I find and what you're going to find in this process, particularly if you go off and work in government, government's kind of set up like an old school rotary phone. Meanwhile, we've got this going on. And our world hasn't caught up to these choices that we have. We don't use the technology in the right way. We essentially think in silos. Let me just jump ahead here. So the reason why I was at the assessors conference was to throw this at them. This is just land value per acre. There's no buildings here. We turned the buildings off in the software, and we just want to see what's going on with the with the land. So you see up here in the upper left, see how everybody's dirt value is the same value per acre. So everybody's paying the same per gallon of gas up there, let's say, right? Y'all follow me? One of the reasons why we do this is we want to see how screwed up the assessors are, and we see stuff like this. There is no reason why these people's dirt right here should be that different from everybody else across the street. That's showing me human error where the assessors made a mistake, or there could be some policy issue. But I was presenting this in Cheyenne, Wyoming at like 8 in the morning, and I was just making a joke. I knew what the problem was, but I just wanted the audience to understand. I said, what's going on here where that dirt is, was that $15,000 an acre? And when you cross the street, it goes up to $40,000 an acre. How, when in the same zoning category, does land double in value by crossing the street? Y'all know why that happens? The tax assessor raised her hand. She was sitting in the front row, and she just yells out. She goes, no, you don't understand. And I'm like, what am I missing? She goes, well, they have more land. The more land you have, the lower the value per acre. Doesn't that seem weird to you? So the more land I get, the more discount you give me. Now the mayor starts laughing. And she's like, yeah. And I said, okay, this fellow's got 3 miles of street around the property. Oops. And this person's got 200 feet of infrastructure. She goes, we don't count infrastructure as part of the valuation. That's not how we do it. We do it based on market sales and comps and whatever. She starts going through all this gibberish. And I'm like, so you don't care about the cost of the city? She goes, that's not our job. So I get more land, you give me a discount. I consume more infrastructure, you give me a discount. So I presented at the assessors. The assessors magazine is called Fair and Equitable. And I asked them, how is this fair and how is it equitable? To their credit, they all said to me back, it's not. And I'm like, well, where did the standard come from? Did Moses give this to you? Like, where did this come from? And they're like, we don't know. You need to talk to Larry Clark. So seriously, I'm not making this up. I tracked this guy, Larry Clark, down. And I'm like, I'm like, Larry, where did this come from? He's like, I don't know, probably something to do with agriculture. But now that you pointed out, I can see the inefficiency. It's not fair. It's not equitable. We probably need to change it. It'll just take a while to get through the system. Generations of city planning has gone on with this stupid bias baked into it. How do you think the market's going to manipulate? How do you think the invisible hand is going to manifest itself? So this is what we see in the city. As you try to talk about efficiency and climate change and what's equitable, you're going to start to run into all sorts of things that are underlying the system that make it not. Expose it, share it with people. So in the last couple of minutes here, let me kind of talk about redlining. So I'm sure you all know about redlining now. 1934, the FDR administration changed economic policy. Certain neighborhoods were allowed to get protected mortgages, other neighborhoods were not. There's a great website called Mapping Inequality that keeps track of all the redlining maps across the country. So for 3 generations, from 1934 to 1968, certain families were not allowed access to the wealth system of our country. To show you how pernicious this is Tacoma. Here's this redlining map. You see the 4 colors here: best, desirable, declining, and hazardous. We were deemed hazardous by 2 things, well, 3. If you were next to a factory or something like that, industrial, or by race. If you were an infiltration of immigrant, that was the first one. Second was your Negro population. Those are the only 2 measurements of race that you would look at. So here's an example. That's a red line neighborhood over here. And here you see mixed Southern Europeans. Negro population 10%. Southern Europeans is another name for Italians. Italian immigration was the #1 immigration class in 1930. Coming in at #2 were Germans. Guess what kind of Germans were coming in 1930? That was Jewish populations. So this was an economic device used to separate wealth in communities. This little, I don't know if you can barely see it, that little square right there. I mean, here it is written. There are several Negro families, 3, who own property in this area, and this constitutes a sufficient hazard. So those 12 blocks were denied access to a different to the economic flow that other families were afforded. So we're doing work in Kansas City, and they asked us to analyze redlining, and we showed them this model, and I said, I can tell you where it's happening right here. When you cross that one street, that's called Troost Avenue. Notice how the model goes from an orange plateau to a yellow plateau. It takes this huge drop just by crossing the street. This is 2019. Redlining stopped in 1968. We dropped Troost Avenue on the redline map. You could see east of Troost was heavily redlined. So when you tapestry the redline map on the value per acre model, you can see this haircut every district takes today, even though we stopped doing this theoretically 50 years ago. We have to show folks this stuff to get them to understand the economic consequences. These are human design policies that create these inequities, help people see it, right? Some of the work that, well, you're familiar with Chris's work and this university's work on taxation. We actually modeled the same thing here in Asheville. My city and my county both adopted reparations after the murder of George Floyd. My city was celebrated all over the place for this. I live there. I know that they weren't going to do anything. So pro bono, we did an analysis of the economics in our community around assessment because of our city's history. So it all starts with race. So this is a race map of my county. It's a very white community because it's part of Appalachia. When you zoom into the city, this is the city boundary. This big old hole right there is the Biltmore Estate. So the city basically bends around the Biltmore Estate. What a lot of people don't realize about the Biltmore Estate is it's actually a huge subdivision, a golf course community appended to the Biltmore Estate that the Vanderbilts built. It's still 99% white. Sidney Powell had a house there. Super awesome. This is my friend Reggie, who lives in Shiloh. So let's just look at the house. So there's Reggie's house. Here's Sydney's house. So now Sydney's house is like no massive mansion or anything. But let's look at the data now. So this is the land value per acre. So this checks out. Sydney's dirt is worth more than Reggie's dirt. That makes sense. This is the building value per square foot. I showed this to the assessor and I said, look, I've got a degree in architecture. I've worked as an architect. Can you help me understand why Reggie's house is more valuable? How the hell is that? His response to me was, well, you know, she's got more square footage. Again, back to that bias. I said, so this is like toilet paper. The more that you get, it's cheaper. We buy architecture in bulk. She's got 4 bathrooms. Reggie's got 1. That's the most expensive square footage in a house. Coming in at number 2 is the kitchen. I can guarantee that her house has more value in it based on the square footage. Why does that math look the way? He's like, I don't know. So that's going to result in him paying more taxes per acre than her. Now, here's the kicker. In North Carolina, our reassessments happen every 4 years. So from last assessment to this assessment, his has gone by more than double what hers has. Is his house more desirable? How is that? Now, the key thing is, again, this is all hiding in plain sight. On the property card, she's renovated, and Reggie clearly hasn't. Why is this happening? Now, in most audiences, I have to explain the sales ratio curve, which is what you all did here, but we did the same thing. So we replicated your work. And this is what we see in Buncombe County. For every house that's purchased at 225,000, it gets assessed at 225. If you buy a house that's less value, it gets overassessed. So that the excess charge for the lowest wealth folks in our county is $1 million a year in overcharge. And if you're rich, you get a little discount of about 5.9 million. So if you adopted reparations county, this is the reparations. You owe that transference of $7 million a year should at least be in the fund for reparations because that's what you're taking each year. By the way, they really actually didn't really like the fact that we put this out there, but it was fun. Get them going on this stuff. When the county dug in, we did too. So this is our state law. Don't be intimidated by the laws to just read them. They're kind of simple. This is it. If our value in North Carolina shall be the true value, and with an open exchange and somebody would buy and sell a house for. So our tax value equals market value, period. So let's look at some examples. Here's a house. Here's what the computer assessed it at. So every tax assessor, I mean, they can't do all 250,000 parcels. So they make this Excel spreadsheet that runs it called a CAMA model, a computer automated mass appraisal system. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. That's what it priced that house at. Now, luckily we had a sale. So this is what it sold for. So be it not for the sale, we could see that these folks are overpaying for their government at 16% per year, right? Now the assessor, the human, corrected it with the sale price down to about 100%. That checks out. Here's another one. The computer underassessed it. The assessor brought it up in value. Okay, that's practice, right? That follows the law. Let's see how they practice with rich people. You have to adjust scales. Here's what the house sold for. Here's what the computer assessed it at. And I showed it to my assessor and I said, look, if my child brought home a test score of 50 on a test, I'd have a conversation with the child. I'd want to know what's going on. Why aren't you interrogating your data? Why aren't you looking at your CAMA model to see how far off it is? And he's like, well, we didn't know. We're professionals. I'm like, oh, you are? Okay. Here's what you did as a human. Here's another one. You see the bias yet? Not only is the system biased from a computer standpoint, the system is also biased in practice. The moral courage on this last one here to bring it up one whole percentage point, boy, you're really doing a civic service here in the community. This is incredibly embarrassing to our assessor. Now, I'm speaking to you right now as an activist. I'm speaking to you as a citizen in my community that was appalled at seeing this in my community. When we did this analysis, my company was hit with a tax penalty. We received threatening emails. Don't expect people to just throw roses at your feet when you put this stuff out there. But we felt it was the right thing to do. And we showed them that this person right there is paying 100% full freight. Well, how much of that person and all of their neighbors does it take to cover the subsidy of that one house? We did the math on it. It's that one person and 5 neighbors covering the subsidy on this one house on the side of the mountain. So we put it out there for our community to say, these are choices that somebody's making. Is this the choice that we all adhere to when we adopt reparations? Incidentally, the assessor was awesome about this. He's like, well, this is hard to do. I'm like, no, we're using the same software you've got. We use Esri. Here it is. You can do a model just showing the land value change in 1 year. That's showing you who's being screwed right there. It's pretty easy. Don't wait for the citizen to figure this stuff out. You should be doing this as your job. Crazy thing about this model, here's my office. If you're to walk across the highway into my neighborhood, look what's going on. I showed this to the assessor and I said, what's going on when you walk in a couple of blocks and all of a sudden the dirt value shoots up in just a little piece of my neighborhood? His answer was, well, that's a different tax neighborhood code. I said, hold the phone. Inside my neighborhood, there's different neighborhoods. And he's like, well, yeah, there's this, and he starts speaking gibberish. And I said, well, who drew that map? He's like, well, I don't know. Is this all starting to sound familiar to you all yet? Well, where the rubber meets the road, this is 2 properties side by side. That's the dirt value under that house. Across the property line, this is the dirt value here. There's a 200% difference just crossing the property line. Now, trained as a city planner, I can tell you, I know what happened here. On Montford Avenue, that was a streetcar line. The streetcar ran down Montford Avenue. The rich white folks lived along the streetcar line. This is a 1920s neighborhood. their help lived inside the neighborhood and had to be able to walk to their houses to be the servants in to their neighbors. They lived in the neighborhood in this area. So that legacy effect that's tantamount to redlining is just a different silo that's causing the same economic consequence. Y'all follow me on that? This is redlining. It's just not the HOLC map. It's the map inside the tax system. So back to Reggie's neighborhood, what you see going on here, notice how everybody's in every neighborhood that's inside Reggie's neighborhood is level. That's what we call gentrification, right? Hey, Joe, you saw the state law. It says that the market value, it's not our fault. You bought a house in Reggie's neighborhood and you set the new market value, therefore everybody's the same market value. Incidentally, that's an illegal practice called sales chasing, but that's a detail. But that's what they're doing up there. That's gentrification. I could fall for the trap that meets the state law. When you cross the highway or the Hendersonville Road and get into the richest neighborhood in our entire state, notice how there are 2 transactions in that green pad and it didn't affect anything else around it. If you're going to look at gentrification, please go look at the rich neighborhoods. You see some fascinating stuff. Like this is my favorite 22-acre parcel on the Blue Ridge Parkway. The Blue Ridge Parkway is essentially our waterfront, our lakefront. This is a 22-acre parcel with a 16,500 square foot house on the parkway. It has a 2,500 square foot finished basement, which is like bigger than my entire house. I think that's awesome. Here's their tax bills from 2011. What does it say on 2011?
$3,955,100.
$4 million in 2011. In 2022, what does it say?
3 million.
3 million. Okay, first of all, this should be a $25 million property. So that's the first discount. Secondly, it's losing value. Did you all know that? So we ran an analysis of all the wealthiest neighborhood to see how many properties are losing value. And 55% of the households are losing value for a net loss of 40 million bucks. I think we really need to start an urban renewal program for the Chads and Cassidys of the world. They need our help. This is clearly blight, right? So back to Reggie's neighborhood, he's overpaid $1.5 million, or his neighborhood has, in taxes, while the richest neighborhood in our country, our state, has been underpaid about 4.4 million. That's 111 school teachers that we're not paying for to give them a tax break. My colleague on my team, Lanier, had this great quote, so I went ahead and made her a quote on my slideshow. You know, there's an assumption that these are errors that are random, but our work shows that it isn't. These patterns show up in the maps. Use graphics to help people see it, because then it becomes real for them. So I would argue that we're playing checkers in the middle of a chess match. We're falling prey to biased conversation, getting wrapped up in gentrification, and missing the actual game that's going on. I want to just challenge you to get past that. Get past climate change, get past bumper sticker slogans of stuff, and dig a little deeper to find what's going on, but also find a way to visualize it for folks. So this is the red line map brought to today to show how our green line neighborhoods are still not keeping up in value. They're being suppressed in growth. Incidentally, one of my colleagues actually took the test. This is the kind of nerds we are. He took the test to be an assessor. You all are getting master's degrees or have some of you have PhDs. Can you get a master's degree in property assessment? No. The way that our government is run, you just have to pass a test. So you maybe work in the finance department, maybe don't even have a graduate degree, and you just think, oh, I could be an assessor. So you take this test. This is a screenshot he sent me from the test. And I was like, oh, hell no, you are not teaching this shit. So that's the same 4 colors as redlining, and it means the exact same 4 things. When you read these stories about appraisals, so if I take the assessor's test and I stay in the private sector, I'm an appraiser. If I take the assessor's test and I go to the government, I'm an assessor. Same test, same bias. What we find in the marketplace is that appraisers undervalue neighborhoods based on bias. And you read stories about Black houses that are consistently undervalued for their wealth. So that means they make less money when they sell it because of mortgages. On the flip side, they're being overassessed and pay more money for their government. That's the bias baked into the system by design. So I shared it with Larry. And I'm like, dude, you got to stop doing this. And he's like, oh my. I'm like, oh my indeed. You know, just have the courage to talk to people about it and allow them the chance to mitigate. And I'll close this part with a quote from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Have the courage in your careers to go out and put things out there for people. Don't be surprised when that door slams in your face or you start to have problems, but find ways to help people understand it and let people see that there's somebody with a sticker gun that's setting the pricing structure. So I'll just go ahead and leave you with that. I know that I've dumped a lot of information here and I'm guilty of maybe flooding y'all with information. So let me kind of step back. One is be agnostic. Let the data show what's going on. We call it geo-accounting. You know, your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant cares if you can afford a boat. We don't make judgments on cities. We just show them the math and let them make their choices. Understand your audience. Everybody that goes through Urban3, we're all nerds and we're guilty of talking like this when we could say this. You know, it's just don't be precise with your language. Just get people to understand. There's this great quote from Albert Einstein that I love, which is, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. So it's a challenge to us as professionals to communicate to regular people. This comes naturally to me because I'm trained in a graphics field, but 65% of every audience are visual learners. 90% of our information comes through our eyes. So put stuff on a map so they can see it. And don't worry so much about all of the details of it because you'll actually kill your audience in the process. Also, storytell. This is how we communicate as humans. I gave you a very long story. There are 3 acts to that play that you just got. Make a narrative that the audience can follow. You want to inspire curiosity. You don't want to make people feel shamed in a presentation. And also back to McCard. The evidence is there, but it tends to be too cold. You must enliven it with the story. So that whole book is a story that's wrapped around known evidence that was around in the 1960s. And I'll just go ahead and close there. Thanks for your time. Make your pleasure. So I'm here for questions.
Hey, question. I think it's curious to dig more into the be agnostic statement. I think I was thinking about some of the earlier work when you think about showing folks a map. I think maybe one interpretation, I could see some government official looking at and thinking about needing to redevelopment to increase, maybe tax in the neighborhood, and that leads to maybe who's in the neighborhood who leaves, things like gentrification or thinking about equity work. So when you think about being agnostic with the work and telling stories, kind of how does that all fit together when there's maybe unintended consequences or people are making decisions that are looking at the information and making a decision that continues to perpetuate what you're trying to show them.
Yeah, there's gentrification is a dicey thing to talk about. My neighbor is a retired Vietnam War veteran, fixed income and disability. He's born in 1948. 1948. He's also Black. He lived through the redlining of my neighborhood. I am a gentrifier because I moved in next door. Mr. Lordman talks to me about the value gain in the neighborhood and how much he appreciates it. He also wants to sell his house for as much money as he can get to bequeath it onto his kids and pass that wealth intergenerationally. We run a risk where we say we're going to freeze it, and that could harm Mr. Lordman in the process, as opposed to let's listen to Mr. Lordman and what are his interests in this? Why isn't he allowed to sell his house for top dollar? Is it going to change my community? Would I end up with a white neighbor? Most likely in Asheville, definitely. Is that going to change the culture of my neighborhood? Definitely. Will I lament that? Yes. But is it my choice in the neighborhood or is it Mr. Lordman's choice to gain wealth? So I tend to not, I know that I gloss over a lot of pieces of that. I want people to see the system and the different penalties that are there. But I think when you get into matters of gentrification, we want to talk about displacement. I also don't want to have Mr. Lordman displaced because his values are shooting through the roof. I think he's deserved of a rebate for suffering through that neighborhood for so long. And maybe his taxes should get arrested And then he could realize the value change without being penalized. I think that's more fair for Mr. Lord. But those are the kind of conversations that if we hit with one policy mechanism, we need to understand the consequences of that. Does that answer that?
Yeah.
Also, what we find is that what my city has done is it can't afford the roads that keep on going out. And frankly, I think those folks out there need to pay the true costs for their choices. Why should my neighborhood's taxes go up to compensate for their infrastructure? Or at least let's see what that exchange is and let them know that they're being subsidized too. There's leakages happening all throughout the city that should be all on the table, and make sure that these are conscious choices. Emily?
Joe, thank you so much for your talk. I learned a lot. I had a question about land value taxation. Is that kind of a more objective way of valuing land as opposed to the sort of squishy assessor appraiser kind of approach? And I wondered what you thought. I mean, I know it's been tried in fits and starts. Do you think it has a future?
You all know about land value taxation?
Taxing the land rather than the building.
Let's see. So Henry George is sort of who it's known after. He was a tax economist from the 1800s. And his promotion was, we should tax you based on your land rather than the improvements on the land. And to make it kind of simple, think about what's going on in the US in the late 1800s. You have this flood of immigration from Europe, particularly on the East Coast. You see this, we read about now tenement dwellings and overcrowding. You see it in Chicago in its growth period in the late 1800s. And he thought, well, just because your family showed up in the mid 1850s, why should you be able to sit on land? Meanwhile, there's a garbage truck that goes by, there's all that, but if you use it as vacant land, your tax is vacant, not for all the services that are provided. So you should at least be, I call it a 2-drink minimum. You should at least be charged based of the public investment in your property. It's kind of simple when you hear it that way. You're just like, well, why don't we do that? The guy was like, did all of these conferences around the country. There's a great book that he wrote about it. Helen Keller wrote preface to it. But anyway, it spurred this movement called Georgist or land value movement. Elizabeth Maggie Phillips is a proponent of this. I love her eyebrows. They're super awesome. And she thought, I can't get adults to change their ways. I'm just going to go ahead and teach kids. So she invented a board game called the Landlord's Game. Does that look familiar to you? It's Monopoly. How do you win at Monopoly? Location, 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 land assembly. And when you put buildings on it, you win, right? She taught us this. Now, here's the thing that was ironic about it. She was teaching us this to make us understand capitalists and how they behave. But at the same time, it's the capitalist system that shows us where the leakage is too, right? So don't necessarily shame on the capitalists. Realize that that's just a blunt tool to show us where our policy fallacies are or foibles. So I don't know. I think you're going to still run into the same issues, which is what is the value inside the loop versus out here? Should it be the same? I think you're going to still see humans trying to making mistakes. I think it's going to be better because at the very least you're going to stop land speculators or at least penalize them because they'll be paying more of their fair share in taxes than wasting that land. Because that's the land waste and speculation causes a lot of other problems. It's like we don't really have a housing problem. We have a lot of land vacancy with no incentive for people to sell if they're being taxed at a low rate. There's vacant parcels we studied in Kansas City, Kansas. They're valued at $40 a lot. Or sorry, $400 a lot. So that means they're paying $40 in taxes on that land. So think about a garbage truck driving by once a week for an entire year. Is that going to be more or less expensive than $40? Or the pipe that's there that goes in front of that property. So that house is essentially economically upside down. The vacant land in South Bend, Indiana is subsidized to the tune of $2.5 million a year. And Mayor Pete was tearing houses down. And we're like, dude, why are you doing that? You're taking taxable value and wiping it out. And you're already subsidizing all of the vacant lots, $22.5 million a year. You'd be better off giving the house to college students for $1 and letting them live there. because then y'all be taxpayers.
Judas, so your basic framework, your argument seems to be you have to correspond between properties and the expense, the tax they pay and the expenses they generate, the least physical expenses they generate. And so one of your, I guess, solutions to make that happen is to have greater density. What are other options? Assuming people are addicted to single family homes and suburban lifestyle, and so we're not going to switch to massively dense urban settlements. What are other policy options or mechanisms that can get us closer to a match between the taxes people charge and the expenses they're generating for the city or whatever the jurisdiction is, or other options?
I mean, this right here, I think this is the first, but not, we did this in Lafayette, Louisiana in 2016. And that was the first time it's ever been done this way, which is kind of mind blowing to me. You know, when Apple sold me this iPhone, don't you think they charged me for the aluminum that's in here? I don't have one of the titanium ones, sorry, but they charged me for the glass. When you buy this LaCroix, don't you think you're paying for the can? We do that. We figure out that cost. Yet in the cities, we have this kind of squishy, slushy kind of financial system that's, I guess, and now it's looking more deliberately opaque for a reason. But it's like, why hasn't that system changed and brought up to today's standards of technology? So that's all we're doing is using Esri software to program and make network math and send people stuff. I think if I could snap my fingers and change the world, that would be the first thing I would change is the tax system. So it operated more like this. But you can see the political damage that I'd be up against with trying to get that approved. Who would adopt that once you've been given this subsidy for so long? You know, this is going to be the human problem that we're on this gift for so long. People get used to it. It's harder to take that away from people. There's actually math that your own university does with Richard Thaler's department about the consequences in behavioral economics and how people resist losing money. So we don't go that far. I don't think I could ever win that argument. What I can do is make you aware of the problem so you can see it. I don't know what the answer is going to be. I think that over your lifetime, I hope we can start to mutate our revenue systems to do this. I think we're starting to see that because you're seeing California, Oregon, Michigan, Florida have all adopted these kind of tax perversions of Prop 13, where we arrest the value of housing. Well, it doesn't change the financial calculus of everything else. It just gives people a gift who made it through the door first. Anybody from California? Anybody want to move to California? If you move to California, you're going to be penalized a massive tax hit for being the new person in the door. While your neighbor who might have been there since 1970 is paying $200 in taxes, you're paying $20,000. That's kind of the perversities in the models. I don't know what's going to change, but I don't know if that answers the question. Was this too nerdy for you all? Or? Yeah.
For your consultancy, what's the biggest, who requires it at city to have the consultant? Is it activists? Wondering what drives that engagement.
Yeah, this is dicey. Now I'm not a think tank, right? So this is very think tanky material, but you don't want to like walk in the door and irritate your client, right? So what the clients want is they want that transparency. Could you please just explain this to us? We have, I'll just tell you all that we always sit ourselves in the client's seat when we do the presentation. I was doing a presentation in Bentonville, Arkansas, home to Walmart. You see my presentation, right? They were actually okay with me doing what I did about Walmart because I said, don't hate the player, hate the game. Even though I actually abhor Walmart for what they did. You know, it's like I'm not happy with what they do in the community. But to be fair, they're doing that in plain sight because we're too maybe afraid to ask questions on the consequences. And we get communities end up getting played by Walmart. One of the things I had to have a talk with my analysts about is that we had one of the memes that we had in the show was an Elizabeth Warren meme. And I told my analyst, I'm like, that has to go. We can't show that in Arkansas. Even though my analysts wanted to like stick it in their face a little bit, we changed the quote to a Sam Walton quote. You know, it was still the same thing about you better do math and understand your business kind of thing. So I still had the ability to kind of dig them a little bit because they weren't doing the math, but I did it with one of their heroes rather than I knew that they would resist if I showed Elizabeth Warren. So I think that's the thing with consultancy. You have to, there's only so much you can get away with. And you have to respect your clients. Otherwise, one is you'll never work there again, which sometimes we don't care. But you really want them to hear the information. But that we've had about like the city of Cary, or actually let me correct that, the town of Cary, North Carolina, 170,000 people. They call themselves the town of Cary. And actually, you know what? Show you what consulting suicide looks like. This is fun. Anybody from Atlanta? There's a Gwinnett County, Georgia. Sorry, I can't see with the zoom in the way here. Oh, I had the zoom. Far. Sweet. So Gwinnett County, Georgia is outside of Atlanta. And actually, I was supposed to be here 2 weeks ago. And the client was the realtors of the Chicagoland area. And they eventually canceled the contract because I was going to talk about redlining and tax inequity. And they said, we don't do that. I asked them, well, how do you know? Like, we don't want to talk about that. And so they cut the contract. And I was like, all right, so I didn't get a job. Gwinnett County, Georgia is outside of Atlanta. Lawrenceville is the county seat. I'm not making this up. They told me I was not allowed to say 4 words when I presented to their community. I wasn't allowed to say the word urban, city, town, or municipal in my presentation. Not making this up. In the South, this happens a lot where they're just like, those are ugly words for us. We don't want to start a fight. We just want them to hear you. Like, what do you do when your company's called Urban3 and you can't say the word urban? I'm like, I guess we're just 3. But as we're doing the analysis, and they're outside the beltway of Atlanta, I was talking to my client, the economic development director, and I was like, Kelly, y'all are 812,000 people. The whole time she kept on telling me they're rural. I'm like, you're 812, you're almost 1 million people. That's not rural. She goes, honey, look, we're 460 square miles. Okay, let's do some math here. If you divide 460 miles into the 812,000 people, that's 1,800 people per square mile. This is their density. Okay. I'm doing a stakeholder meeting the night before the public presentation in the 2nd floor of the Chamber of Commerce meeting with just the leaders of the community. There are 75 people in there. And I'm showing them this. And I'm like, so you're less dense than DeKalb that has a piece of Atlanta in it. We had all of this other data, so I put it up there for them. And I was just like, how is it? Y'all got, what is that? 600 people per square mile, denser than Mecklenburg, North Carolina. What's in Mecklenburg? And somebody goes, Charlotte? Yeah, I've heard of Charlotte. Did y'all ever hear of Lawrenceville? Or how about Beaufort? So how is it they created a Charlotte, or over here, over here is in Davidson, Tennessee, that's Nashville. Both of these places have professional football teams. There's no such thing as the Gwinnett County Cowboys, right? How'd you do this? So here's their model. And when we did it, I asked Josh, I'm like, could you just turn that on its side? It looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's like the same thing from end to end. They've built every square inch of that county with the same crap. That's what they got. So this is what we typically see, where you can see the 3 different places and you can see their downtowns in all of them. You can't see that here. So this is the most potent building in all of Gwinnett County that their great grandparents left them. So just to rub it in, there's their most potent building at the back down there. All of these places are less dense. So we made an economic heart monitor and put the 3 counties at the same scale side by side and pulsed them out here. So I showed this to them. I'm like, so we've got a peak value of 192 million. Less dense Austin is 476 and y'all are flatlining at 8. The conversation that night was mind blowing. This one county commissioner kept on saying, but we're not urban. I said, ma'am, I never used the word in the whole entire presentation. I said, y'all have the same horizontal infrastructure as that and none of the vertical stuff to pay for it. Are you broke yet? And she goes, oh yeah, we're broke. And she kept pushing. We're not urban. So it's just like, you've got to show the information to people. They'll give you all of their biases. What that meant for her, because that room that night, I was the darkest person in the room. Even though 40% of their population is South Asian, they've got the highest Indian and Pakistani population in the Atlanta metro area, the highest Korean population in the Atlanta metro area. Hispanic, 20% African Americans. You're looking at 60% of the population are people of color. That room was 100% white that night. So she was telling me what her political signals were. I just gave them their data. Incidentally, they've had me back like 5 times. I'm like the Dr. Phil of Gwinnett County. I'm like, y'all got a problem. You're addicted to pills, but you still love each other. You better stop. Anyway. So consultancy, it's a dicey thing. There's things we can get away with depending on the client. But in this case, I thought I'd never work there again. But there are other clients that want to talk about this data. So in Fort Worth, Texas, we're actually doing an economic analysis of redlining, long-term consequences of inequitous policies. So we do get good clients that way.
All right, thanks. Oh, yeah. I tell you what, anyone who needs to go, otherwise we can go around and have a conversation with Jeff.